Did you ever make frugal recipes only found in old cookbooks? Meals that stretched every penny? These dishes fed families when every bite counted. What did we lose by forgetting them? Potato water bread was a clever solution found in old cookbooks to stretch precious ingredients while adding moisture and flavor to homemade bread. Instead of discarding the water left over from boiling potatoes, cooks used this nutrient-rich liquid as part of the bread dough, replacing some or all of the water or milk called for in traditional recipes. This technique made the bread softer and gave it a subtle potato flavor, elevating a simple staple into something special. It was especially popular during times of scarcity when flour and dairy were expensive or rationed. Potato water bread required fewer costly ingredients, but delivered a satisfying loaf perfect for everyday meals. This bread could be baked in large batches to feed families or communities, making it a practical choice in households trying to maximize their resources. Its presence in historic cookbooks reflects the ingenuity and thriftiness that home cooks embraced. For many, this bread was a reliable source of comfort and sustenance, showcasing how frugality and creativity went hand in hand in the kitchen. Mock chicken salad, often made using canned tuna or beans, was a budget-friendly alternative designed to replicate the flavors and textures of traditional chicken salad without the higher cost of fresh poultry. Canned tuna, drained and flaked, or mashed beans like chickpeas served as the base, mixed with mayonnaise, celery, onions, and seasonings to mimic the creamy and savory qualities of the original. This salad was popular in households and church kitchens alike, especially during economic downturns or wartime rationing when meat was scarce. Mock chicken salad could be served on sandwiches, crackers, or fresh greens, making it versatile and appealing. Its affordability and ease of preparation allowed families to enjoy a familiar favorite without straining budgets. Recipes for this dish appeared frequently in old cookbooks, underscoring a cultural emphasis on resourcefulness and making do with what was available. Despite its humble ingredients, this salad was celebrated for its flavor and accessibility, proving that delicious meals did not require expensive components. Hominy and ham soup was a hearty, satisfying dish combining dried hominy corn with small pieces of ham to create a flavorful and filling meal. Hominy, made by treating dried corn kernels to remove their hulls and germ, was an inexpensive pantry staple with a unique chewy texture that absorbed the rich taste of ham broth beautifully. The soup was often seasoned with onions, garlic, and herbs, simmered slowly to develop deep, comforting flavors. This recipe was especially popular in rural and working-class communities where stretching ingredients mattered. The inclusion of ham added protein and smoky undertones without requiring a large portion of meat. Hominy and ham soup could feed entire families on a modest budget, making it a staple in old cookbooks focused on frugality and nutrition. It was a meal that warmed bellies and hearts, reflecting the enduring tradition of creating satisfying dishes from humble components. Steamed spuds and onions was a simple supper that made the most of inexpensive, readily available ingredients. Potatoes and onions were sliced or chunked and steamed together until tender, then seasoned with salt, pepper, and sometimes a bit of butter or herbs for flavor. This dish was prized for its ease of preparation and ability to fill hungry families without needing expensive items or complicated cooking techniques. It was commonly featured in old cookbooks as a frugal meal, especially during times when meat was a luxury or scarce. The natural sweetness of the onions complemented the earthy heartiness of the potatoes, creating a satisfying combination. Steamed spuds and onions reflected a return to basics, emphasizing wholesomeness and economy. Often served alongside soups or stews, this dish was a testament to how simple food, prepared with care, could nourish and sustain. Apple Brown Betty was a classic baked dessert designed to stretch limited fruit supplies while delivering comforting sweetness. Layers of sliced apples alternated with buttered breadcrumbs and sugar, then baked until tender and golden on top. This dessert was especially popular in households that needed to make the most of seasonal or leftover apples, transforming them into a warm, fragrant treat. Apple Brown Betty was economical yet satisfying, requiring few ingredients beyond staples likely already on hand. It was a dish that combined texture and flavor, the softness of baked apples with the slight crunch of toasted breadcrumbs, making it a favorite in old cookbooks focused on frugality. Often served with cream or custard, it provided a touch of indulgence without extravagance. Apple Brown Betty embodied the resourcefulness and warmth that defined home cooking in less prosperous times. Graham cracker pie crust desserts offered a thrifty shortcut for making pies without the need for traditional pastry dough. The crushed graham crackers, combined with butter and sometimes sugar, formed a quick no-bake or simple baked crust that saved time and expensive ingredients like flour and shortening. This method made pie making more accessible to home cooks on a budget or with limited kitchen equipment. Popular in old cookbooks from the 1900s to the 1990s, graham cracker crusts were paired with a variety of fillings, from creamy custards to fruit preserves, resulting in delightful desserts that felt homemade and special. The crust's sweet, slightly crunchy texture added a pleasing contrast to smooth fillings. These recipes exemplified how creativity in the kitchen could produce satisfying results without excess cost. Graham cracker pie crust desserts became beloved staples in frugal households, cherished for their simplicity, taste, and ability to bring joy to family tables. Sour Braten-style pot roast was a slow-cooked, marinated beef dish adapted to use cheaper cuts while preserving the rich flavors associated with this traditional German recipe. The beef was soaked in a mixture of vinegar, water, spices, and aromatics for several days to tenderize and infuse it with tangy, complex notes. Cooking the marinated roast slowly ensured the tougher cuts became tender and flavorful. This recipe appeared in old cookbooks as a way to enjoy hearty, festive meals without the cost of premium meat. The resulting pot roast was often served with gravy and sides like mashed potatoes or sauerkraut, making it a full, satisfying meal. Sauerbraten-style pot roast reflected how immigrant cooking traditions influenced American home kitchens, emphasizing flavor and resourcefulness. Its enduring presence in frugal recipe collections shows how combining technique with modest ingredients could create memorable dishes. Corned beef hash with cabbage was a cheap and filling meal that stretched leftover corned beef by combining it with cabbage and potatoes. The ingredients were diced and cooked together until crisped in a skillet, resulting in a savory, textured dish full of flavor and warmth. Corned beef hash with cabbage was especially popular in households looking to maximize leftovers and minimize waste. It was easy to prepare, used minimal new ingredients, and offered a satisfying meal that could be eaten any time of day. This recipe was a common feature in old cookbooks focused on thrift and practicality, emphasizing hearty, no-fuss cooking. Its combination of tender meat, soft potatoes, and slightly sweet cabbage created a balance of tastes and textures cherished by many families. This dish symbolized comfort, thrift, and the ingenuity of making the most of what was available. Vegetable chowder with milk base was a creamy, nourishing soup made from a mix of inexpensive vegetables simmered in a milk-based broth. Root vegetables, corn, and peas were common inclusions, providing bulk and sweetness while keeping costs low. The chowder was thickened with flour or other starches and seasoned simply with herbs and pepper. This soup was favored in old cookbooks for its ease of preparation, versatility, and ability to feed many with limited resources. Vegetable chowder offered warmth and nutrition, making it especially valuable during colder months or in communities with tight budgets. Its creamy texture made vegetables more appealing to children and adults alike. The recipe exemplified frugal cooking that did not sacrifice flavor or comfort, providing a satisfying meal from humble ingredients that could be varied depending on what was on hand. Pickled beets were a common sight in old pantries, prized for their long shelf life and tangy flavor. Home cooks preserved beets by pickling them in vinegar, sugar, and spices, creating a vibrant side dish or salad component that added color and zest to meals. This preservation method allowed families to enjoy the nutritional benefits of beets well beyond harvest seasons. Pickled beets were easy and inexpensive to make, requiring only basic ingredients likely available in most kitchens. Their sweet and sour taste complemented heavier dishes, balancing richness with brightness. This recipe was often included in frugal cookbooks focused on stretching food and minimizing waste. Pickled beets also represented a link between traditional food preservation techniques and everyday practicality. Their continued popularity in regional cuisines and nostalgia for old-fashioned home cooking speaks to their enduring appeal and the importance of resourcefulness in the kitchen. Rice and beans. Burrito Southern style was a simple and frugal handheld meal combining cooked rice and seasoned beans wrapped in a soft, homemade flatbread. This portable dish was perfect for feeding families on a budget, providing a satisfying balance of protein and carbohydrates with minimal expense. The rice and beans were often flavored with basic spices like garlic, onion, and chili powder, making the filling flavorful despite its simplicity. The flatbread was typically made from flour, water, and a pinch of salt, cooked on a griddle or skillet to create a flexible wrap. This recipe was popular in Southern households where beans and rice were pantry staples and bread making was a daily skill. The burrito was easy to prepare in bulk and could be enjoyed hot or cold, making it ideal for lunchboxes, church suppers, or quick dinners. Its frugality and nutrition made it a timeless favorite, showcasing how modest ingredients could be transformed into a convenient and hearty meal. Carrot and raisin salad was a sweet and inexpensive dish that combined shredded fresh carrots with plump raisins, often dressed lightly with mayonnaise or a simple vinaigrette. This salad was prized for its bright color, natural sweetness, and crunchy texture, offering a refreshing contrast to heavier, savory dishes. Carrot and raisin salad appeared frequently in old cookbooks, focused on stretching produce and incorporating inexpensive ingredients into meals. Its preparation was straightforward, requiring minimal cooking and common pantry items. This salad was especially popular at church suppers, family gatherings, and potlucks, where it added variety and nutrition without adding cost. The raisins provided bursts of natural sugar, while the carrots contributed fiber and vitamins, making the dish both tasty and wholesome. Its lasting appeal lies in its simplicity and balance, proving that economical ingredients can create flavorful, satisfying side dishes. Butternut squash and potato bake was a seasonal casserole that used affordable root vegetables to create a warming, filling dish. Cubed butternut squash and potatoes were layered or mixed with simple seasonings like salt, pepper, and herbs, then baked until tender and lightly browned. This recipe capitalized on the natural sweetness of squash, balanced by the earthy comfort of potatoes, offering a delicious, nutritious side or vegetarian main course. It was especially popular during autumn and winter months when these vegetables were abundant and inexpensive. Butternut squash and potato bake required little more than basic pantry staples and oven time, making it a favorite in households aiming to make the most of seasonal produce on a tight budget. Its hearty texture and mellow flavors provided comfort and satiety, reflecting the spirit of frugal, thoughtful cooking that treasured wholesome ingredients. Tomato soup with grilled cheese croutons was a frugal twist on two classic comfort foods combined into one satisfying dish. The soup was typically made from canned or fresh tomatoes cooked down with onions and seasonings to create a rich, flavorful base. Grilled cheese sandwiches were prepared separately, then cut into small bite-sized pieces or croutons and floated on top of the soup just before serving. This combination allowed cooks to stretch a simple tomato soup into a more filling meal by adding crispy, cheesy bread bites that brought texture and richness. It was a popular recipe in old cookbooks designed for economical family meals, offering both comfort and nourishment. The ease of preparation and use of inexpensive ingredients made it a go-to for busy households and communal dinners. Tomato soup with grilled cheese croutons showcased the ingenuity of home cooks who combined pantry staples to create satisfying and memorable dishes. Cornmeal dumplings and vegetable stew were a clever way to add substance and stretch thin soups or stews, particularly in frugal cooking traditions. Simple dumplings made from cornmeal, water, and a pinch of salt were dropped into simmering vegetable stew, where they cooked until fluffy and tender. This addition increased the stew's volume and provided a comforting, slightly grainy texture that complemented the vegetables. Cornmeal dumplings were common in rural and farming communities where cornmeal was a staple and no part of a meal was wasted. They added warmth and heartiness to brothy dishes, making the most of limited ingredients while still satisfying hungry appetites. This recipe featured prominently in old cookbooks focused on thrift and nourishment, reflecting a culture of resourcefulness. Cornmeal dumplings in vegetable stew remain a testament to how simple additions can transform a meal from modest to memorable. Cabbage soup with potatoes and onions was a filling, economical soup that relied on staple vegetables to create a wholesome, warming dish. Chopped cabbage, diced potatoes, and sliced onions were simmered together in water or broth, seasoned simply with salt, pepper, and herbs. This soup was especially popular during hard times when meat was scarce or unaffordable, providing fiber, vitamins, and sustenance for large families. Its simplicity made it easy to prepare in large pots, ideal for communal meals or leftovers. Cabbage soup was often enhanced with bits of leftover vegetables or grains, making it flexible and adaptable to what was on hand. This dish was a regular feature in frugal recipe collections, exemplifying the principle of stretching ingredients while maintaining flavor and nutrition. Cabbage soup with potatoes and onions was more than just sustenance. It was a symbol of comfort and resilience in the face of scarcity. Molasses and ginger cookies were inexpensive, spiced treats made from pantry basics that brought sweetness and warmth to the table. Using molasses as a primary sweetener, these cookies were rich and chewy with a distinct ginger bite, balanced by spices like cinnamon and cloves. Their ingredients were affordable and often already stocked, making them a popular choice in households aiming to create desserts without extravagance. Molasses and ginger cookies appeared in many old cookbooks as budget-friendly recipes that could satisfy sweet cravings during holidays or everyday occasions. The warming spices made them particularly comforting in cooler months, while the molasses provided a deep, robust flavor. These cookies were easy to make in batches, ideal for sharing at church socials, family gatherings, or school events. They represented a tradition of using simple ingredients to create joy and comfort, embodying the spirit of resourceful baking passed down through generations. Lima bean and tomato salad was a refreshing cold dish that mixed cooked or canned lima beans with fresh tomatoes, herbs, and a simple dressing. This salad was affordable, nutritious, and easy to prepare, making it a favorite in households looking to combine pantry staples with fresh produce. The creamy texture of the lima beans complemented the juicy acidity of tomatoes, while herbs like parsley or basil added brightness. Dressed with vinegar or lemon juice and a touch of oil, the salad was light yet filling, suitable as a side or light main course. Lima bean and tomato salad appeared often in frugal cookbooks as a way to incorporate protein and vegetables economically. Its colorful presentation and balanced flavors made it a staple at potlucks and family meals alike. This dish demonstrated how simple, inexpensive ingredients could be combined to create appealing, healthful food that nourished both body and budget. Eggplant and tomato casserole was a layered vegetable bake that stretched affordable produce into a flavorful main or side dish. Sliced eggplant and tomatoes were arranged in layers, seasoned with herbs and sometimes cheese or breadcrumbs, then baked until tender and fragrant. This casserole highlighted the natural sweetness and richness of the vegetables, offering a satisfying dish that required few additional ingredients. It was especially popular during harvest seasons when eggplants and tomatoes were plentiful and inexpensive. The dish reflected frugal cooking values, emphasizing using what was on hand to create meals that were both economical and delicious. Eggplant and tomato casserole often featured in old cookbooks as a vegetarian-friendly recipe that could feed many. Its comforting texture and bold flavors made it a cherished choice for families seeking wholesome, affordable meals. Peanut butter sandwich pudding was a creative take on bread pudding that incorporated peanut butter as a key ingredient to add richness and protein. This dish used leftover or stale bread soaked in a mixture of milk, eggs, and peanut butter, sometimes sweetened or seasoned with spices, then baked until set. It was a versatile recipe that could be served sweet or savory, depending on additions like sugar or salt. Peanut butter sandwich pudding appeared in frugal recipe collections as a way to use up bread and pantry staples while delivering a satisfying, nutritious dish. Its creamy texture and nutty flavor made it a comforting option for families on a budget. This pudding showcased the inventiveness of home cooks who transformed simple ingredients into enjoyable meals that minimized waste and maximized flavor. Creamed corn with bacon bits was a beloved side dish that combined the natural sweetness of canned corn with the smoky, savory crunch of small bacon pieces. The corn was simmered in a creamy sauce made from butter, milk, and a bit of flour to thicken, creating a luscious texture that contrasted perfectly with the crisp bacon. This dish was popular in households aiming to stretch simple ingredients into satisfying additions for dinners and holiday meals alike. Bacon bits, often saved from frying or cooked separately, added bursts of flavor without needing large quantities of meat. Creamed corn with bacon bits was both economical and indulgent, a way to elevate everyday canned vegetables with pantry staples. It appeared in old cookbooks as a reliable, crowd-pleasing recipe that required minimal effort and expense. Its balance of creamy sweetness and smoky saltiness made it a comforting accompaniment to meats and casseroles, especially during colder seasons when hearty meals were welcomed. This dish remains a classic example of frugal cooking meeting delicious results. Homemade sauerkraut and sausage skillet was a simple one-pan dish that made the most of fermented cabbage and inexpensive sausage to create a flavorful and filling meal. The sauerkraut, prized for its tangy bite and long shelf life, was sautéed with sliced sausage, onions, and sometimes a bit of apple or caraway seed for extra depth. This recipe was favored in frugal kitchens for its ability to feed many with affordable ingredients, making use of preserved foods alongside fresh components. The skillet preparation meant minimal cleanup and quick cooking, ideal for busy households or communal meals. Homemade sauerkraut and sausage skillet reflected the resourcefulness of cooks who combined pungent fermented vegetables with hearty proteins to craft balanced dishes. It was especially popular in immigrant communities with Germanic roots, but found wider appreciation due to its satisfying taste and economical nature. This dish embodied the spirit of making bold flavors from simple, accessible items. Sweet potato and apple hash was a sweet and savory skillet dish that paired two affordable root vegetables into a warm, comforting meal. Cubed or grated sweet potatoes and apples were cooked together with butter, cinnamon, and a touch of salt, creating a harmonious balance of natural sweetness and earthiness. This hash was easy to prepare using basic pantry and produce items, making it a favorite in frugal households seeking hearty breakfasts or side dishes. The soft texture of cooked sweet potatoes blended with the tender, slightly tart apples, while the warming spices brought seasonal comfort. Sweet potato and apple hash appeared in many old cookbooks as a way to stretch limited ingredients into flavorful, nutritious meals. It was especially popular in autumn and winter, when root vegetables and apples were plentiful and inexpensive. This dish demonstrated how simple, wholesome ingredients could be combined creatively to nourish families without spending much. Cabbage and potato pancakes were a frugal twist on traditional potato pancakes, incorporating grated cabbage to add flavor, moisture, and bulk. The vegetables were mixed with flour and eggs to form a batter, then pan-fried until golden and crispy on the outside, tender inside. This recipe was common in old cookbooks and regional cuisines where cabbage and potatoes were staples. These pancakes stretched inexpensive ingredients into a filling dish suitable for breakfast, lunch, or dinner. The mild sweetness of cabbage complemented the earthy potatoes, while frying added a satisfying crunch. Cabbage and potato pancakes were economical, nutritious, and straightforward to prepare in large batches, making them ideal for families or communal meals. Often served with applesauce or sour cream, this dish balanced savory and sweet elements. It stood as a testament to the creativity and thrift of home cooks who transformed simple produce into beloved, versatile dishes. Cornbread and bean casserole was a hearty, layered dish combining crumbly cornbread with baked beans to create a filling and economical meal. The casserole was assembled by layering warm baked beans and cornbread batter or crumbs, then baked until golden and bubbling. This recipe was popular in old cookbooks focused on frugal cooking, especially in southern and rural kitchens where both cornbread and beans were staples. The combination offered protein, fiber, and carbohydrates, satisfying hunger while minimizing costs. Cornbread and bean casserole was easy to prepare in bulk, perfect for feeding families or church suppers. The beans lent a savory richness, while the cornbread added a slightly sweet, crumbly texture that balanced the dish. This casserole exemplified how simple pantry ingredients could be combined to create comforting, nutritious meals without excess expense, reflecting traditions of thrift and practicality in the kitchen. Vegetable stir-fry with leftover greens was a quick, simple dish that made the most of assorted leftover vegetables by sautéing them in a hot pan with oil and basic seasonings. Leftover leafy greens like spinach or kale, along with other vegetables such as carrots, onions, or peppers, were tossed together and cooked until just tender, preserving color and nutrients. This stir-fry was a staple of frugal kitchens, preventing waste and maximizing the value of available produce. It required minimal ingredients and could be ready in minutes, ideal for busy households. Vegetable stir-fry with leftover greens provided a fresh, flavorful, and nutritious side or light main dish, adaptable to whatever vegetables were on hand. Its presence in old cookbooks highlighted a culture of resourcefulness and mindful cooking that valued every ingredient. This dish remains a reminder of how simple techniques and leftovers can create satisfying meals. Rice and lentil patties were pan-fried cakes made from cooked rice and lentils combined with seasonings and sometimes breadcrumbs or eggs to bind. These patties were economical and filling, offering plant-based protein and carbohydrates in a versatile form. They could be flavored with onions, garlic, herbs, and spices, then fried until crisp on the outside and tender inside. Rice and lentil patties appeared in old recipe collections as budget-friendly options ideal for stretching ingredients and providing nutritious meals. They could be served as a main dish, side, or snack, suitable for families seeking affordable protein sources. This recipe showcased the ingenuity of cooks who transformed simple staples into satisfying textural dishes with minimal cost. Its popularity reflected a broader tradition of combining grains and legumes for balanced nutrition and flavor. Cabbage and sausage soup was a hearty and affordable soup combining inexpensive sausage with shredded cabbage and other simple vegetables like potatoes and onions. The sausage added smoky richness and protein, while the cabbage and vegetables provided bulk and essential nutrients. This soup was easy to prepare in large pots, ideal for feeding families or community gatherings on a budget. Its warm, savory flavor and nourishing qualities made it a favorite in old cookbooks focused on frugal meals. The recipe reflected a balance of taste and thrift, making use of affordable meats and plentiful vegetables. Cabbage and sausage soup was often served with crusty bread to round out the meal, creating a comforting, filling dinner. This dish exemplified the comfort and practicality of traditional home cooking that maximized resources while delivering satisfying flavors. Its straightforward preparation, combined with its ability to stretch inexpensive ingredients, made it popular through generations. Many families treasured it as a staple during colder months or times of economic hardship. Beyond just sustenance, this soup embodied the spirit of communal cooking and care, bringing people together around the table with food that was nourishing both to body and spirit. Peach cobbler with biscuits was a simple fruit dessert made by layering canned or fresh peaches with biscuit dough and baking until golden and bubbly. This dessert was popular in old cookbooks for its ease, affordability, and ability to transform limited ingredients into a sweet treat. The biscuit topping created a soft, flaky crust that complemented the juicy, sweet peaches beneath, balancing texture and flavor perfectly. Peach cobbler with biscuits was often served warm with cream or ice cream, making it a beloved comfort food that evoked nostalgia and warmth. Its popularity stemmed from using accessible ingredients that many households had on hand, especially during peach season or when canned fruit was stocked in the pantry. This dessert embodied the spirit of frugal cooking by turning pantry staples into something special and celebratory. Its warm, nostalgic flavors continue to remind people of simpler times and shared meals around the family table, making it a cherished recipe passed down through generations. The ease of preparation and satisfying sweetness helped make peach cobbler a perennial favorite in many kitchens. Oatmeal and raisin bread was a wholesome loaf that incorporated oats and raisins into traditional bread dough to add flavor, texture, and bulk. The oats provided a nutty chewiness while the raisins contributed natural sweetness, making the bread more interesting and nutritious. This recipe was common in old cookbooks, aimed at stretching bread supplies and making loaves more filling for families. Oatmeal and raisin bread was often baked in home ovens and enjoyed fresh or toasted for breakfast, snacks, or tea time. The addition of oats and raisins allowed bakers to use less flour or enrich the bread without costly ingredients, reflecting the values of economy and taste. This bread represented a tradition of resourceful baking that valued both flavor and practicality equally. Its comforting texture and subtle sweetness made it a staple in households seeking affordable yet flavorful homemade bread. The recipe also provided a way to incorporate whole grains and fruit into diets when fresh produce might be limited. Oatmeal and raisin bread remains a nostalgic favorite that speaks to the ingenuity of home cooks managing tight budgets. Rice-stuffed baked apples were one of those meals that towed the line between dinner and dessert. Apples stored well through winter, and rice was cheap, filling, and easy to cook. Together, they made something practical and gently sweet. You hollowed an apple, stuffed it with cooked rice, and baked it until it softened and started to collapse. If you had cinnamon or brown sugar, great. If not, a pat of lard did the trick. Some added milk to make it creamier. It was not fancy or meant to impress, but it filled stomachs and made children smile. In a time where smiles were hard to come by, that counted. These apples were often served after a bowl of soup or beans as a way to end on something soft. They warmed the kitchen and reminded folks that even hard times had gentle endings. It's not just cloth napkins and towels. Cloth nappies help a lot too. They're a lot better for saving than disposable ones, and they actually do work just as well. Is that really what you want to be spending extra on? Extra expensive diapers? You really don't need to be doing that. Hey, saving is all about cutting the corners that need trimming, and you got to get used to that. This is especially true for families who are just starting out and can't seem to find a comfortable routine or rhythm with their finances just yet. Sweet potato pie, a beloved dessert that traces its roots back to the American South, has been warming kitchens for centuries. Though its exact origins are debated, it's believed that the sweet potato, native to the Americas, was first cultivated by indigenous peoples. The pie's widespread popularity grew when African enslaved people brought their culinary skills to the South, incorporating the starchy tuber into their dishes. The core ingredients of sweet potato pie are simple: sweet potatoes, sugar, butter, and spices like cinnamon and nutmeg. But its rich flavor makes it much more than the sum of its parts. It was an affordable dessert made with ingredients that were widely available even in the toughest times. It could be baked, stored for a few days, or shared at family gatherings, making it a practical choice for resourceful cooks. Sweet potato pie isn't just about taste. It also holds deep cultural significance. In African American communities, it became a symbol of family, togetherness, and tradition, particularly during the holidays. Nutritionally, sweet potatoes are rich in vitamins A and C, making the pie a healthier option compared to many other desserts. Baked apples with honey were such an incredible medieval dish that they were especially for any kind of party or celebration. The baking was always done near the fire or a hearth oven, and the dish was incredibly simple. It really was just an apple that was baked whole with honey drizzled over it, or sometimes they would simply dip the whole thing in honey. People would also boil the apples first and then bake them to get a dish that resembled the texture of apple pudding as we know it today. This dish was eaten at the end of a course or as a fast day meal, and honey and apples were things that you could eat on days where you had to fast. The combination of a softened, decadent apple mixed in with caramelized golden honey was something that scratched all the right itches. Baked apples with honey had an incredibly strong association with festive and seasonal meals, and they were particularly really popular around harvest and Christmas. Apples were abundant, and honey was something that people could spare sometimes for the right kind of occasion. This dish is something you see in medical texts, estate records, cookbooks, and other medieval-era references. Apples were also prized because of how easy they were to store. Hardtac with gravy was a way of reviving something almost too tough to chew into something soft and sustaining. Hardtac, that old sailor's biscuit made of just flour and water, was shelf-stable and cheap. You could find it in army rations and emergency pantries, and in the Great Depression, people brought it back out of necessity. By itself, it was like biting into a brick. But soak it in milk or water, then smother it in gravy or fat, and suddenly you had something warm and edible. The gravy could be made from bacon drippings, flour, and whatever seasonings you had on hand. Sometimes people would stir in bits of onion or mashed beans to bulk it out. The result was soft, salty, and just enough like dinner to satisfy. Kids might not have loved it, but they learned to eat it fast. It filled you up and made good use of food that was meant to last forever. In hard times, that mattered. Hardtac with gravy was a lesson in patience, in chewing, and in making do with what you had, even if what you had was practically stone. People from the Depression era still had to deal with seasonal produce and shopping. Nowadays, you get canned, pre-frozen, ready-made, packaged versions of everything. You'll get mangoes out of summer and oranges in, like spring or something. It doesn't make any sense, though, and that's because those fruits aren't really the real deal. Buying seasonal produce isn't just cheap and easy, it's also extremely healthy for you. You get the most natural produce without any additives or preservatives and at a better price. Do you know how rare it is to have a good deal nowadays? Native Americans were the original survival experts, foraging and preparing meals that could sustain them in even the harshest conditions. One plant they turned to was the Indian turnip, also known as Jack in the Pulpit. This root, easily recognizable by its unique flower structure, was a versatile food source, though it wasn't always the easiest to prepare. The plant contains toxins that must be carefully removed before it can be eaten. This involved either drying or boiling it multiple times to render it safe. It wasn't exactly a pop it in the pot and go kind of vegetable, but with the right preparation, it became an excellent starchy base for soups, stews, or even roasted on a fire. While it wasn't something you could stock up on like potatoes, its seasonal availability made it a crucial part of the indigenous diet. The plant's nutritional value came from its carbohydrates, which provided energy for those long days spent hunting and gathering. It was also an important protein supplement when other food sources were scarce. Culturally, the Indian turnip was both a staple and a symbol of survival. It taught early settlers and indigenous peoples the value of resourcefulness, how to make use of nature's hidden treasures. Ostra was born out of the 1960s drive to reinvent everyday food. This fat substitute promised guilt-free indulgence without the extra calories. Its introduction coincided with a time when scientific optimism often outpaced regulatory oversight. As the industry celebrated a marvel of chemical engineering, food safety protocols were only just beginning to catch up, leaving a gap that allowed unanticipated health concerns to emerge. Consumers embraced Ostra for its novelty and promise of a lighter future, even as emerging reports hinted at severe gastrointestinal distress. Laboratory findings eventually revealed that, while free of traditional fat calories, this compound could disrupt the absorption of essential vitamins and cause digestive discomfort. This paradox, a product engineered to aid dietary goals that ultimately compromised nutritional well-being, became a cautionary tale in modern food history. Interestingly, advertisements once lauded Ostra as the solution for those seeking to enjoy their favorite snacks without compromise. However, as adverse effects accumulated, both scientists and regulators pushed for tighter safety measures, marking a significant turning point in food additive scrutiny. Cream-chipped ham over toast was the sort of meal you could smell from the driveway, and not always in a good way. You started with thin-sliced lunch meat, chipped into ribbons, usually from the deli's cheapest bin. Tossed it into a bubbling white gravy made from flour, margarine, and milk. Stirred until it thickened like pudding. Then ladled the whole mess over white toast or biscuits. The salty ham melted into the sauce. The bread went soggy fast. And somehow, it all worked. In factory towns and Pennsylvania kitchens, this was a staple. They even gave it names like SOS, stuff on a shingle, though the S didn't always stand for stuff. It was a working man's breakfast, a quick lunch, or a thrown-together dinner when time and money both ran out. The kids didn't ask for seconds, but they didn't go to bed hungry either. It wasn't fancy. It wasn't even really appetizing. But it was food that stuck with you, literally and figuratively. and on cold nights, with the news humming in the background and the toast steaming on a chipped plate, it reminded you that even a mess of gravy and scraps could feel like a warm hug. Ketchup sandwiches were not a joke back then. They were survival. 2 slices of white bread, a squeeze of ketchup, and that was lunch. When fresh tomatoes were too expensive or gone altogether, the bottle stood in. It was cheap, it was sweet, and it gave just enough tang to fool your brain into thinking you had a real sandwich. Sometimes people would add onions or pickles if they had them, but most of the time it was just the red stuff and bread. And you would be surprised how many kids looked forward to it. It was bright, flavorful, and in a decade where most meals were beige, that mattered more than you would think. Ketchup was a staple condiment because it had a long shelf life and could cover the taste of anything going off. In this case, it became the main event. Parents handed it out with a smile, even if their hearts sank doing it. It was food, and that counted. You might laugh at it today, but in the 1930s, ketchup sandwiches were a reminder that even when the pantry was bare, you could still pretend to eat like everyone else. You know one thing people really did back then? They used public libraries. Granted, this isn't the same today as there's a big emphasis on logging your reading on online apps and trackers, ebooks and audiobooks and all sorts of other things, but it's still a decent idea to check out your local library for a hot minute. For many early settlers and indigenous peoples, survival meant using whatever was available in nature. Watercress, a leafy green that grows in cool, fast-moving streams, was one such resource. It's been used for centuries, especially in Europe and North America, not only for its sharp, peppery flavor, but for its nutritional punch. Watercress soup became a popular dish when fresh greens were abundant in spring and summer, offering a source of vitamin C and essential minerals. Simple to prepare, watercress soup combined foraged greens with broth or milk, often seasoned with onions or garlic for flavor. The greens were widely available, but because they spoil quickly, preservation was tricky. For many, the solution was to dry the leaves for use in the winter months when fresh greens were hard to come by. Culturally, watercress soup had its place in rural and pioneer kitchens, representing both frugality and ingenuity. It was a dish born of necessity, yet it's packed with value, providing vital nutrients during lean seasons. For settlers, it was a reminder of the earth's hidden treasures and a sign that even humble ingredients could be transformed into something life-sustaining. Few chemical names have caused as much unnecessary panic as dihydrogen monoxide. Despite sounding like something from a lab experiment gone wrong, this so-called hazardous substance was, in reality, nothing more than water. The term became the centerpiece of a long-running joke, highlighting how scientific jargon could manipulate public perception. In an era when food safety concerns were growing, misinformation had the power to create fear, even over something as essential as water. The 1960s saw increasing scrutiny over food additives, preservatives, and chemical compounds in everyday products. With rising concerns about artificial ingredients, people became more wary of what they consumed. The dihydrogen monoxide hoax played into that anxiety, proving how a lack of understanding could turn a necessity into a perceived threat. The irony? Every person alarmed by its presence had already been consuming it their entire lives. Though water itself is harmless in moderation, it's technically possible to overdose on it, a rare but real condition called water intoxication, where excessive consumption disrupts the body's sodium levels. Boiled bread dumplings were a Depression lifesaver when meat was gone and vegetables were thin. Families took stale bread, ends or crusts, and soaked them in water or milk until soft. Then they added flour, maybe an egg, and salt or onion. This got rolled into dumplings and boiled until firm. They soaked up broth and stretched soups into meals that could feed 5 instead of 2. The texture was dense, like a sponge that clung to every drop of flavor. Sometimes they were served with just gravy or fat drippings. They were not pretty, but they filled you up and gave the illusion of plenty. And in a time when illusions were all you had, that meant something. Bread dumplings turned trash into dinner, and that was enough. Turkey Deon was how leftovers became legend. You started with dry bits of Sunday's bird, some broccoli from the freezer, and a can of cream of chicken soup. Then came the magic, a cheese sauce, sometimes called Mornay if you wanted to sound fancy, poured over everything and baked until bubbly. It came out golden, rich, and smelling like someone tried. That mattered. It was a casserole that masked fatigue, dressed up scraps, and made Tuesday dinner feel like Thanksgiving's secret encore. Dads liked it. Moms knew it was efficient. Kids just remembered the gooey forkfuls and how broccoli did not taste like punishment when it was drowning in cheese. In the 1980s, dishes like this were culinary glue, binding time, taste, and tradition. Turkey Deon did not make headlines, but it made memories. The kind you recall when you open a fridge of leftovers and wish you could call your mother to ask how she made it taste so good. It was never just about cleaning out the fridge. It was about warming the room, feeding the family, and reminding everyone that even the scraps had value. So it was a lot easier to make one-pot meals than it was to make a starter, a main course, and something on the side for dessert. I don't mean easier as in it took less labor and effort. I mean it was a lot easier on your wallet. Why do you think casseroles were as popular as they got during the 50s and 60s? One-pot meals are a world of convenience, and you can make a meal that feeds the entire family for the whole day with minimal amounts of ingredients. Plus, if you're looking for good recipes to start with, then there's a treasure trove waiting for you in the past decades in our channel. Wilted lettuce salad was not just about saving soggy greens. It was about making the most of what the garden gave, even past its prime. When lettuce started to wilt in the heat or after a few days indoors, families did not toss it. Instead, they poured hot bacon grease mixed with vinegar over the top, reviving the leaves into something tender and flavorful. The heat wilted the lettuce just enough, and the vinegar gave it a punch of brightness. Bits of onion or crumbled bacon were added when possible, but the core of the dish was that sizzling pour. It turned tired lettuce into a warm salad with more depth than any cold dressing could offer. You did not need much to make it feel special. It was a moment when something old felt new again. In a time of extreme frugality, it captured the mindset perfectly. Do not throw it out. Just use it differently. Wilted lettuce was not a fallback. It was a quiet trick that helped people feel like they still had a choice at the table. Seafood has long been praised as a healthy, protein-rich option, but in the 1960s, some portions came with an unexpected side effect: mercury exposure. As industrial pollution increased, heavy metals made their way into oceans and rivers, accumulating in fish that millions consumed daily. At the time, awareness of mercury's dangers was limited, and food regulations had yet to impose strict monitoring. Consumers enjoyed their seafood dinners unaware that certain species carried levels of the toxic element high enough to pose serious health risks. Mercury is particularly insidious because it builds up in the body over time. While a single meal wouldn't cause immediate harm, consistent exposure could lead to neurological damage, developmental issues in children, and even kidney failure. Pregnant women were at the highest risk, as mercury could interfere with fetal brain development. Yet, in the mid-century push for convenience and affordability, few questioned what lurked beneath the surface of their favorite fish dishes. It wasn't until the 1970s, after growing scientific research and public outcry, that regulatory agencies like the FDA established strict mercury limits in seafood. Slow cooking was once a necessity, not a luxury. Before pressure cookers and pre-packaged meals, tougher cuts of beef were transformed through hours of gentle simmering, unlocking deep, rich flavors. This smoky chipotle beef ragu was one such dish, a meal that took time but rewarded patience with melt-in-your-mouth tenderness. Chipotle peppers, known for their earthy heat, were a staple in traditional Mexican and Southwestern cooking, but by the mid-20th century, their smoky kick found its way into American kitchens. Paired with tomatoes, garlic, and slow-braised beef, this dish delivered a bold, layered flavor that stood apart from ordinary pot roasts. Served over creamy polenta or even buttered noodles, it was both comforting and deeply satisfying. Despite its rich taste, this meal was surprisingly budget-friendly. Beef chuck or brisket, once some of the most affordable cuts, became tender and flavorful when cooked low and slow. The sauce was built from pantry staples, making it an easy, accessible choice for home cooks. But over time, as quick weeknight meals took priority and polenta lost ground to pasta and rice, this dish faded from dinner tables. Today, chipotle has seen a resurgence in trendy restaurants, but this home-style beef ragu remains a forgotten classic. Pickled beet eggs looked almost too strange to eat, but they were one of the smartest ways to stretch a protein that was hard to come by. Eggs were precious, and when you had a few on hand, preserving them meant you could enjoy them over days instead of one single meal. The trick was in the brine. You took leftover beet juice, usually from canned or boiled beets, added vinegar and some spices, and dropped peeled boiled eggs into the jar. After a few days, they turned bright pink and took on a tangy, earthy flavor that was far more interesting than a plain boiled egg. The color made them feel like a treat, especially to children who had not seen anything festive in months. These were served at room temperature, sometimes sliced onto bread or mashed into sandwiches. They could last for over a week in a cool place, which made them ideal for families without ice boxes. They were flavorful, pretty to look at, and most importantly, long-lasting. Pickled beet eggs were one of those strange depression dishes that did not just make do, but made something new. I think one of the worst money drainers of our generation is the lack of public transport. If it's not thousands of dollars spent back and forth on Uber, it's a lot of money and interest payments on leases for a car. Seriously, public transportation is amazing and is one of the best things about the modern world. You can get through an entire state in what? A few dollars? I mean, just look at how Japan does it. They have nothing but public transport, and they seem a lot happier. If you find yourself commuting often, then maybe you might want to look into more affordable ways of doing that. In the early days of American settlement, nature's bounty was both a blessing and a challenge. The nannyberry tree, a small fruit-bearing shrub, became a valuable source of sustenance during hard times. Native to North America, the nannyberry's small, dark purple fruits were often foraged and turned into porridge, a hearty and filling dish. The fruit was not only easy to gather but was available in late summer, making it a vital source of nutrition when other foods were scarce. The porridge itself was simple: wild nannyberries mashed and mixed with grains like oats or cornmeal, sometimes sweetened with maple syrup if available. It was a resourceful way to get a nutritional boost, as the berries contained essential vitamins and antioxidants. Preservation wasn't as easy, though. In a time before refrigeration, preserving the berries required drying or canning, which meant a lot of work in the short fruit-bearing season. Though not a glamorous dish, nannyberry porridge represented survival. It was filling, cheap, and provided much-needed energy. Tater tot casserole was a symphony of simple. Ground beef browned in a pan, mixed with cream of mushroom soup, spread into a baking dish, and crowned with a perfect grid of frozen tater tots. It was like meatloaf and hash browns had a baby and raised it in the Midwest. The tots crisped in the oven while the filling turned into a savory, creamy mess. No one could resist the golden crunch followed by that hot, rich bite underneath. It was not just food, it was folklore. The kind of dish passed down from Aunt Susan to Cousin Mike with pride and a little grease stain on the recipe card. It was unfussy, easy to stretch, and beloved by the whole family. Dad called it stick-to-your-ribs food. Kids just wanted more ketchup. And Mom, exhausted from the day, knew this was one of the few dinners no one would complain about. It was not pretty, it was not healthy, but it was home. There was a time when meatloaf was a household tradition. Made from simple, inexpensive ingredients, it was a staple of weeknight dinners and homecoming feasts alike. But what made this version special was the glaze, a perfectly balanced mix of ketchup and brown sugar that caramelized into a sticky, flavorful coating as it baked. Ground beef was one of the most affordable proteins, and by mixing it with breadcrumbs, eggs, and seasonings, home cooks could stretch a single pound to feed an entire family. Some variations included oats or crushed crackers, while others relied on Worcestershire sauce and mustard for added depth. But the secret weapon was always the glaze, a blend of sweet and tangy flavors that sealed in moisture and gave the loaf its signature glossy finish. So why did this dish start disappearing from dinner tables? As dietary trends shifted, meatloaf's reputation took a hit. Low-carb diets, leaner meat choices, and a move away from home-cooked comfort foods made it less popular. Pre-made frozen meatloaves also contributed, offering convenience at the cost of homemade flavor. Lima bean stew was one of those one-pot miracles that got families through the leanest stretches of the 1930s. Dried lima beans were cheap, easy to store, and when soaked and cooked slowly, they turned creamy and rich. Families would simmer them all day with scraps of carrot, onion, or potato, whatever they could find. If they had bacon grease or lard, a spoonful added body. If not, salt and thyme would do the job. There was no recipe, just instinct and adaptation. Sometimes the beans were mashed into a thick paste, sometimes left whole and floating in broth. The stew could stretch over 2 or even 3 days, especially if you kept adding water or leftover vegetables. Kids might complain, but mothers knew. This pot was the difference between full and hungry. In many homes, the smell of beans bubbling away was a kind of comfort. It meant there would be something to eat tonight. It was frugal food with just enough warmth to feel like dinner. In hard times, lima bean stew taught you patience, resourcefulness, and the power of cooking what you had, not what you wished for. What people would do instead of always needing to spend money on their downtime was to instead go out to public parks, take a stroll, bathe in some sunlight, feed a dumb bird or two, probably the one that keeps mistaking your rooftop for a bathroom. Hey, they're all a part of God's choir, aren't they? Taking some time to reconnect with nature in parks was not only really good for your money, it was also really good for your mind. Don't believe me? Just look at any number of mental health professionals and the various arguments, studies, and researches they've put up that proves that going outside and touching grass actually does work. Long before store-bought desserts were the norm, early settlers had to get creative with what nature provided. Grape dumplings were one such innovation, born out of necessity and resourcefulness. Made by boiling dough dumplings in grape juice, they were a sweet, sticky treat that made the most of fresh seasonal fruit, especially in areas where wild grapes were abundant. Ingredients were simple but vital: flour, water, and whatever wild or cultivated grapes were on hand. The grapes provided not only sweetness, but also a dose of vitamins and antioxidants. In a time when processed sugar wasn't always available, fruit like grapes were a natural choice for sweetening dishes. Preservation was key. Grapes could be preserved as jams or dried, ensuring that the taste of summer lasted through the colder months. Though grape dumplings weren't a staple in every household, they were a beloved treat for those who could access fresh grapes. Their cultural significance lies in their embodiment of self-sufficiency, utilizing locally available ingredients for a nutritious, comforting dessert. In an era when making the most out of every resource was crucial, grape dumplings were the perfect example of how creativity could stretch both the seasons and the pantry. Old-fashioned corn pudding was sweet, soft, and surprisingly hearty, especially for something that came from such humble beginnings. In the 1930s, cornmeal was dirt cheap and endlessly useful, and this dish was one of the cleverest ways to turn it into a filling side: a bit of cornmeal, water or milk, and just enough sugar to make it feel special. Eggs were sometimes added, but often it was just flour, grease, and corn. It came out like a custard or a thick bread pudding, depending on what you had. Baked slowly, it developed a crust on top and a warm, spoonable inside that made it a family favorite. People would eat it hot out of the oven or cold the next morning, sometimes drizzled with molasses or a pat of margarine. It was both side dish and dessert, depending on your mood. There were no store-bought sweets for most folks back then, so corn pudding gave just enough sugar and softness to count as a treat. And for children, it was a rare bite of comfort in a world where food often felt like medicine. It was poor man's pudding, but it tasted like something richer. Baked turnips with herbs is an example of how even a simple and humble root vegetable can be turned into something that gets your kids at the table if you know what you're doing. Luckily, medieval-era cooks had a lot of room for trial and error, and they definitely learned a few things about working with turnips. While baking them was never as common as stewing or boiling them, it was extremely good. Households that had the privilege of a bake oven would abuse that luxury maliciously, in fact. That's just how nice it was. In households where that wasn't a thing, Tay turnips were typically wrapped in kale or cabbage leaves and then baked in ashes or at the edges of a hearth. This was a pretty rustic method, but it would help to soften the turnip, and it let the herbs introduce some much-needed flavor. Of course, you had to be very careful that what you were doing wasn't going to burn the turnips. Monasteries were most commonly known for preparing turnips, and they relied pretty much entirely on olive oil and butter. This resulting dish was something that was really earthy and savory, but the herbs helped when it came to the taste of turnips. For some, that taste can be really overwhelming. Which frugal recipe will you try? Comment below, like the video, and subscribe for more tasty finds.